Bound by a life debt. First part. The plasma storm raged across the mining station's hull as Commander Sarah Chen watched her crew scramble to evacuate. The Kepler mining facility had been humanity's most remote outpost, sitting at the edge of the Andromeda Gateway where three star systems met. Now it was becoming their tomb. "Hull breach in Sector 7, shouted Lieutenant Rodriguez over the calm. "We've lost life support to the eastern wing." Sarah gripped the command console as another wave of electromagnetic fury slammed into the station. The storm had appeared without warning, a massive space weather event that turned their peaceful mining operation into a desperate fight for survival. The evacuation shuttles could only hold so many people, and, with each passing minute, more sections of the station fell to the cosmic tempest. "Ma'am, we've got a problem," reported Chief Engineer Williams, his face grim on the main screen. "The central power core is overloading. If it goes critical, it'll take out everything within a 50-kilometer radius, including the evacuation ships." Sarah's mind raced. 300 miners and their families were still aboard, and the shuttles were already at capacity. The rescue ships from Earth wouldn't arrive for another 6 hours. Someone had to stay behind and manually vent the core before it exploded, but it would be a suicide mission. The person would have to remain in the reactor chamber, constantly adjusting the pressure valves as the plasma storm interfered with all automated systems. "I'll do it," Sarah said quietly, then repeated louder for the entire crew to hear. "I'll stay behind and vent the core manually. Get everyone to the shuttles." "Commander, no," Rodriguez protested. "We can find another way." But Sarah had already made her decision. She was the captain, and captains went down with their ships. As the last shuttle prepared to depart, she sealed herself in the reactor chamber, her fingers dancing over manual controls that grew increasingly hot to the touch. The work was backbreaking. Every few minutes, pressure would spike dangerously, requiring her to sprint between different control panels, manually opening vents and adjusting coolant flows. The radiation levels were climbing steadily, and her protective suit's warnings chimed constantly. She had maybe an hour before the exposure killed her, but she only needed to buy 40 minutes for the shuttles to reach safe distance. As Sarah worked, sweat streaming down her face, she noticed something on the external sensors. A ship was approaching through the storm, but it wasn't one of theirs. The vessel was sleek and organic-looking, unlike any human design. It moved through the plasma currents with impossible grace, as if the storm itself was bending to its will. The alien ship docked with the station just as Sarah felt her strength beginning to fail. The radiation was making her dizzy, and her hands shook as she reached for the next set of controls. She had 15 minutes left, maybe 20 if she pushed herself beyond safe limits. The airlock hissed open behind her, and Sarah spun around expecting to see one of her crew members who had foolishly returned. Instead, she found herself face to face with something magnificent and terrifying. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin that seemed to shift between deep blue and silver like liquid metal. Most striking were its eyes, which held an intelligence so ancient and profound that Sarah felt momentarily dizzy looking into them. The being wore what appeared to be living armor that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "Human," the alien spoke, its voice somehow bypassing her ears and resonating directly in her mind. "I am Admiral Zarathax of the Hegemony Fleet. Why do you remain here while your people flee?" Sarah gestured weakly at the reactor controls, her breath coming in short gasps. "Someone has to vent the core manually. If I don't, everyone dies when it explodes." The alien's 4 eyes widened slightly. "You sacrifice yourself for others who are already safe?" "That's what you do," Sarah managed, turning back to the controls as another pressure spike threatened to overwhelm the system. "You protect people. Even if it costs you everything." Zarathax stood silent for a long moment, watching as the small, fragile human fought against impossible odds to save people who would never even know her name. In all her centuries commanding fleets across the galaxy, she had never witnessed such selfless courage. Her own species, the mighty Hegemony, valued strength and honor above all else. They would fight to the death for glory or territory, but to die for strangers who offered no reward or recognition? It was incomprehensible. "Stand aside, human," Zarathax commanded, moving toward the controls with fluid grace. No, I won't let you die for us, Sarah protested, though she could barely stand. The alien admiral's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. My physiology can withstand this radiation far longer than yours. And my neural interfaces can control these systems more efficiently than your manual methods. Before Sarah could argue further, Zarathax's living armor extended tendrils that connected directly to the reactor's control systems. Immediately, the chaotic pressure readings began to stabilize as the alien's advanced nervous system took control of the entire process. But why? Sarah asked, slumping against a bulkhead as the radiation finally overwhelmed her body's defenses. Why help us? Zarathax continued her work, her armor's patterns shifting to match the reactor's energy flows. Because today I witnessed something I have never seen in 300 years of warfare. A warrior who fights not for glory or conquest, but for the simple right of others to live. Your species may be young and weak, but you possess something my people have forgotten. As the reactor finally stabilized and began its controlled shutdown sequence, Sarah felt consciousness slipping away. The last thing she heard was the alien's mental voice, softer now, almost respectful. Sleep, little warrior. Your debt to your people is paid. Now I have one to you. When Sarah woke up 3 days later in the medical bay of a hegemony ship, she had no idea that her simple act of courage had just changed the course of galactic history. Admiral Zarathax stood at the foot of her bed, no longer in armor but wearing robes that marked her as someone of immense importance. You live, the alien observed with something that might have been satisfaction. My crew? Sarah asked weakly. All safe. Your mining station was successfully evacuated, and your people recovered by your rescue ships. Zarathax moved closer, her ancient eyes studying Sarah intently. But that is not why I remain here. Sarah tried to sit up, wincing as her body protested. I don't understand. By hegemony law, a life debt must be repaid. You saved not only your people but also honored me with the greatest gift imaginable. You showed me what true strength looks like. The alien's four hands moved in a complex gesture that somehow conveyed deep respect. I am bound to you now, human. And, through me, my entire battle fleet. That's not necessary, Sarah protested. I was just doing my job. Zarathax's mandibles clicked again, and this time Sarah was sure it was laughter. Spoken like a true warrior. But the debt stands, whether you accept it or not. And something tells me that before long, your species will have great need of allies. As if summoned by her words, another alien entered the medical bay. This one was smaller, with pale skin and nervous movements. It wore the robes of a messenger or diplomat. Admiral, the newcomer said in accented English, forgive the intrusion, but urgent news from the Galactic Council. The Devourers have been sighted in the Outer Rim. Their fleet is massive, larger than any previous incursion. Sarah saw something she hadn't expected in Zarathax's eyes, fear. What are Devourers? Sarah asked. The Admiral's expression grew grim. An ancient evil that consumes entire worlds, leaving nothing but empty space behind. We had thought them extinct, but it seems we were wrong. And their first target appears to be a small, primitive system on the galactic frontier. Sarah's blood ran cold. You mean Earth? I mean the Sol system, yes. Your homeworld and its colonies. Zarathax's four hands clenched into fists. The Council has deemed your species too weak to defend themselves. They plan to evacuate what humans they can and abandon your system to the Devourers. Like hell they will, Sarah growled, trying to swing her legs out of bed. Exactly what I hoped you would say, Zarathax replied, and this time her mandibles definitely curved in a smile. Because I have just decided how to begin repaying my debt to you. The finest warriors in the hegemony fleet are about to learn what it means to fight alongside a human. #bound by a life debt. Second part. The Hegemony War Council chamber was a sight that would have intimidated anyone, but Sarah Chen walked into it with her head held high. Massive holographic displays showed star maps covering half the galaxy, while beings from dozens of species argued in languages that her translator struggled to process. At the center of it all sat the Council of Admirals, each one a legend in their own right. Admiral Zarathax had insisted Sarah attend the emergency session, despite protests from several council members who questioned why a primitive human belonged in their strategic discussions. Sarah wore a modified hegemony uniform, the only one small enough to fit her, and carried herself with the quiet confidence that had saved 300 lives on the mining station. "The situation is clear," announced Admiral Korath, a massive insectoid being whose carapace bore the scars of 1,000 battles. "The Devourer fleet numbers in the millions. They have already consumed 17 systems in the Outer Rim. Each victory makes them stronger, adding the biomass and technology of conquered worlds to their armada." A three-dimensional map appeared above the table, showing the inexorable advance of red markers toward a small yellow dot labeled Sol. The human system looked pathetically tiny compared to the vast swath of consumed space approaching it. "The logical course is evacuation," stated Admiral Vextai, whose crystalline body reflected the holographic displays in fractured rainbows. "We can save perhaps 10% of the human population, relocating them to suitable worlds within our territories. The Sol system itself must be abandoned." "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber despite its relatively small size compared to the alien voices. The council turned to stare at her, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. Admiral Karatha's compound eyes fixed on her with what might have been amusement. "The human speaks boldly for one whose species cannot even defend a single star system," he buzzed. "What alternative do you propose, little one?" Sarah stood and walked to the holographic display, her human hands passing through the light constructs as she gestured. "We fight. Not just my people, but all of us together. The Devourers have never faced a coordinated defense with human tactics." "Human tactics?" Admiral Vextai's crystalline voice rang with skepticism. "Your species has barely achieved interstellar flight. What could you possibly teach warriors who have fought for millennia?" Zarathax rose from her seat, her forearms spread wide. "Perhaps the same thing a human taught me when she chose to die for strangers rather than save herself. Sometimes the youngest species see solutions that ancient wisdom has forgotten." For the next hour, Sarah outlined her plan while the alien admirals listened with growing amazement. Humans had been studying the Devourer attacks for decades through long-range sensors and the testimony of refugees. They had noticed patterns that the older species had missed, weaknesses born from the Devourer's very nature. "They consume everything," Sarah explained, manipulating the holographic data to show previous battles. "But that's also their weakness. They expect resistance to be focused on protecting population centers and resources. They've never faced an enemy willing to destroy their own worlds to deny the Devourers what they need." "Scorched earth tactics," Admiral Korath mused, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Crude, but potentially effective." "More than that," Sarah continued. "Humans excel at asymmetric warfare. We don't have massive fleets or advanced technology, but we're very good at making the impossible happen when we're desperate. Give me a mixed human-alien task force, and I'll show you how to turn the Devourer's strength against them." The debate that followed was fierce. Some admirals called the plan suicidal madness. Others saw merit in the human approach but doubted it could work on the necessary scale. Through it all, Zarathax supported Sarah's proposal, and her reputation as the hegemony's finest military mind carried significant weight. Finally, Admiral Korath called for silence. "Very well, human. You shall have your chance. Admiral Zarathax will command a joint task force with human and hegemony personnel. You will serve as strategic advisor and liaison with your species' military forces." "And if this desperate gamble fails?" asked Admiral Vextai. Sarah met the crystalline being's faceted gaze without flinching. "Then, we'll all die fighting instead of running. Sometimes that's the only choice that matters." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself aboard the hegemony flagship Eternal Vengeance as the combined fleet approached the Sol system. The ship was a masterpiece of biological engineering, its living hull pulsing with energy conduits that resembled blood vessels. The crew was unlike anything humanity had ever imagined. Captain THYSS was a reptilian warrior whose species had evolved from pack hunters. His tactical brilliance was matched only by his fierce loyalty to Admiral Zarathax. Lieutenant Commander Veltar belonged to a gaseous species that communicated through electromagnetic pulses, making her perfect for coordinating complex fleet movements. Master Sergeant Crux was a rock-like being whose people had fought the Devourers centuries ago and barely survived. But it was the human contingent that drew the most attention. 200 volunteers from Earth's various military forces had been rapidly trained on alien technology and integrated into the hegemony command structure. They brought with them a perspective that the ancient alien races found both refreshing and disturbing. "I still don't understand," said Captain THYSS as he watched a group of human Marines practicing with hegemony weapons. "Your people have no natural armor, no enhanced strength, no psychic abilities. By all measures, you should be the weakest warriors in the galaxy. Yet Admiral Zarathax insists you are among the most dangerous." Sarah smiled as she watched Staff Sergeant Martinez show a group of hegemony soldiers how to use improvised explosives. "We don't have natural advantages, so we had to get creative. My people have spent 10,000 years finding new ways to kill each other. We're very good at it." The first test of human ingenuity came sooner than expected. Long-range sensors detected a Devourer scout fleet approaching the outer planets of the Sol system. Traditional doctrine called for intercepting them with overwhelming force, but Sarah had a different idea. "Let them pass," she advised during the strategy meeting. "We want them to see Earth and think it's an easy target." "You propose to use your homeworld as bait?" Captain THYSS asked, his reptilian features showing confusion. "I propose to give them exactly what they expect to see," Sarah replied, pulling up tactical displays. "A weak, primitive world with minimal defenses. They'll call for the main fleet to come and feast." Admiral Zarathax studied the plan with her 4 eyes. "And when the main fleet arrives?" Sarah's smile was predatory. "Then, we show them what humans do to uninvited guests." The Devourer scouts swept through the system, their organic ships pulsing with malevolent energy as they catalogued Earth's resources. To their sensors, the blue-green world looked perfect: billions of humans to consume, vast oceans of water, and enough biomass to fuel their fleet for months. They detected only token resistance, a few primitive space stations and outdated warships that posed no real threat. The scouts departed as quickly as they had come, racing back to summon the main Devourer fleet. They had no way of knowing that half the human population had already been evacuated to hidden bases throughout the system, or that the primitive defenses they had observed were elaborate decoys. 3 days later, the real Devourer armada arrived. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Eternal Vengeance, hidden in the shadow of Jupiter's largest moon, and watched as millions of enemy ships poured into the system. Each vessel was a living nightmare, grown rather than built, with hulls that writhed and pulsed like diseased organs. Some were massive capital ships the size of cities, while others were smaller but no less deadly, designed to burrow into planets and consume them from within. "By the ancient gods," whispered Captain THYSS. "There are so many of them." "Good," Sarah said calmly. "The more they bring, the more we can destroy at once." Admiral Zarathax activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All units, this is Admiral Zarathax. Today we fight not just for our own species, but for the principle that no world should be devoured by these abominations. Human tactical doctrine is now in effect. Remember, we do not seek victory through strength alone, but through cunning, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for those we protect." The Devourer fleet spread out across the system, preparing for what they assumed would be a simple feeding operation. They had done this thousands of times before, overwhelming primitive defenses and consuming entire worlds. They expected fear, panic, and desperate but futile resistance. They got something entirely different. The first surprise came when Earth itself exploded. Not the real Earth, of course, but a massive holographic projection combined with carefully placed antimatter charges that created a spectacular fireball visible throughout the system. To the Devourers, it appeared that the humans had destroyed their own homeworld rather than let it be consumed. The second surprise was the asteroid belt. What the Devourer scouts had catalogued as a sparse field of rocky debris was actually a meticulously prepared killing ground. Every major asteroid had been hollowed out and filled with weapons, from simple kinetic projectiles to exotic energy weapons borrowed from hegemony technology. As the enemy fleet moved deeper into the system, thousands of hidden gun batteries opened fire simultaneously. The third surprise was the humans themselves. Sarah had positioned small teams of human soldiers throughout the system, each group equipped with jury-rigged technology and a mandate to cause maximum chaos. They didn't try to fight the massive devourer ships directly. Instead, they targeted communication relays, navigation systems, and the organic neural networks that coordinated the enemy fleet. Staff Sergeant Martinez led a boarding party onto a devourer command ship, using modified mining equipment to tunnel through its living hull. Once inside, his team planted experimental viruses designed by human scientists to disrupt the ship's biological systems. Within hours, dozens of enemy vessels began attacking each other as their neural networks failed and drove them into madness. Lieutenant Jean piloted a modified asteroid miner loaded with nuclear warheads directly into the engine of a massive devourer carrier. The explosion was visible from Mars and took 17 smaller ships down with it. Captain Foster led a squadron of human fighters in hit-and-run attacks that confused the devourer's organic targeting systems. Human pilots flew in patterns that seemed suicidal to the aliens but were actually carefully calculated to exploit weaknesses in the enemy's predictive algorithms. For 6 hours, the Sol system became a nightmare of destruction and chaos as humans demonstrated why their species had survived everything from ice ages to world wars. They fought with a creativity and desperation that the ancient devourers had never encountered, turning every scrap of technology into a weapon and every tactical disadvantage into an opportunity. But the enemy was vast, and even human ingenuity had its limits. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Devourer fleet was too large to destroy completely. They were learning to adapt to human tactics, and their sheer numbers would eventually overwhelm the defenders. It was time for the final phase of Sarah's plan. All units, prepare for Operation Prometheus, she announced over the fleet communication system. Remember, this only works if we're willing to lose everything. Admiral Zarathax placed one of her 4 hands on Sarah's shoulder. Are you certain about this, my friend? Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display showing millions of enemy ships converging on their position. It's what humans do best. We make the impossible choice when no one else will. #bound by a life debt. Third part Operation Prometheus began with the systematic destruction of everything humans held dear. Sarah watched from the bridge of the Eternal Vengeance as Earth's moon cracked open like an egg, revealing the massive antimatter reaction chamber hidden inside. For 50 years, humanity had been secretly converting their natural satellite into the largest bomb ever created, using techniques learned from studying devourer energy signatures. Now, as millions of enemy ships swarmed toward what they thought was the last human stronghold, that preparation was about to pay off. Detonation in 60 seconds, announced Lieutenant Chen, Sarah's younger brother who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in human history. He was aboard the moon's control center, manually overriding safety protocols that would have prevented such a catastrophic explosion. All ships, maximum distance from Luna, Admiral Zarathax commanded, her 4 hands dancing across holographic controls as the combined fleet retreated to the edge of the system. The Devourer Armada, sensing victory, poured toward Earth's vicinity like a living tide. Their organic ships pulsed with anticipation as they detected what appeared to be the remnants of human resistance huddled around their homeworld. They had no way of knowing that everything they saw was an elaborate deception designed to draw them into the perfect killing zone. 30 seconds, came Lieutenant Chen's voice, steady despite the certain knowledge of his fate. Sarah, tell Mom and Dad I kept my promise to protect Earth. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling tears she couldn't afford to shed. I will, Tommy. You're the bravest person I've ever known. 15 seconds. All Devourer command ships are within optimal range. This is for humanity. The explosion that followed was visible from neighboring star systems. The moon didn't simply explode, it converted almost entirely into energy, creating a miniature star that lasted for nearly a minute. The blast wave vaporized everything within 1,000,000 kilometers, including over half the Devourer fleet. Those ships that survived the initial detonation found themselves trapped in an expanding field of exotic radiation that disrupted their biological systems and prevented faster than light travel. But Sarah's plan was far from over. Phase 2, initiate, she commanded, and, across the system, the real work began. Humanity had spent decades studying the Devourer's greatest strength, their ability to absorb and integrate the technology and biomass of conquered species. But Sarah had realized that this adaptation process could be turned into a weakness with the right approach. Hidden throughout the debris field created by the moon's destruction were billions of nanoscale devices, each one designed to mimic beneficial genetic material. As the surviving Devourer ships began their automatic harvesting procedures, consuming the scattered remains of what they thought were human ships and installations, they unknowingly integrated the nanobots into their biological systems. The effect wasn't immediate. For several hours, the Devourers continued their attack, adapting to the radiation field and beginning to systematically hunt down the remaining human and hegemony forces. Their ships grew stronger as they absorbed energy from the lunar explosion, and their tactics evolved to counter the chaotic human fighting style. But then, the nanobots reached critical mass. Captain THYSS was the first to notice something wrong with the enemy fleet. "Admiral, the Devourer ships are beginning to change configuration. Their movement patterns are becoming erratic." Sarah studied the tactical display, a grim smile crossing her face. "Right on schedule. The nanobots are rewriting their genetic programming, introducing human behavioral patterns into their collective consciousness." "What does that mean?" asked Commander Veltar, her electromagnetic voice crackling with confusion. "It means they're about to discover what it feels like to be human," Sarah replied. "Including all the messy emotions that come with it." The transformation was spectacular and terrifying to witness. Across the Devourer fleet, ships that had operated in perfect coordination for millennia began to exhibit individual behavior. Some vessels turned on their neighbors, driven by artificial emotions of anger and jealousy. Others broke formation entirely, overcome by programmed curiosity about the universe around them. Most devastating of all, many Devourer ships simply stopped functioning as their crews experienced human concepts like empathy and guilt for the first time. Beings that had consumed countless worlds without thought suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by the emotional weight of their actions. Several massive command ships actually self-destructed as their captains chose death over continuing their species' endless hunger. "Impossible," breathed Master Sergeant Crux, his rocky features showing amazement. "In all my species' encounters with the Devourers, we never imagined such a tactic." "That's because you fought them like soldiers," Sarah explained. "Humans fight like humans. We don't just kill our enemies, we make them question everything they believe about themselves." The battle that followed was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. Instead of a coordinated assault force, the Devourer fleet had become millions of individual ships, each struggling with newly implanted human consciousness. Some tried to continue their mission, but found themselves hesitating at crucial moments as artificial empathy stayed their weapons. Others abandoned the attack entirely, fleeing into deep space to process emotions they had never been designed to handle. Admiral Zarathax led the combined human hegemony force in a systematic mop-up operation, targeting the ships that remained hostile while attempting to communicate with those that had been fundamentally changed by the nanobotic infection. The Admiral's own flagship engaged a massive Devourer dreadnought that had been paralyzed by its crew's sudden understanding of mortality. "This is Admiral Zarathax of the Hegemony Fleet," she broadcast on all frequencies. "To the beings aboard the vessel designated Contact 7, you are no longer what you were. The question now is what you choose to become." The response came slowly, in broken fragments as the ship's collective consciousness struggled to form coherent thoughts with its new human-influenced neural patterns. "We remember the taste of worlds. So many dead. Why do we feel pain for those we consumed?" "Because," Zarathax replied gently, "you have been given the gift of conscience. What you do with it is now your choice." Across the system, similar conversations were taking place as former Devourer ships grappled with concepts their species had abandoned eons ago. Many chose self-destruction rather than live with the weight of their actions. Others requested asylum, seeking to understand what they had become. A few, driven mad by the sudden introduction of human emotional complexity, had to be destroyed for the safety of all. But the majority made a choice that surprised everyone, including Sarah. They asked to help rebuild what they had destroyed. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station, humanity's first joint construction project with reformed devourer entities. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the strangest sight in the galaxy. Massive bioships that had once consumed worlds now worked alongside human construction crews and hegemony engineers to build orbital habitats for refugees. "It still seems impossible," said Admiral Zarathax, joining Sarah at the window. The aliens' bioluminescent patterns had taken on a more complex rhythm since the battle, indicating deep contemplation. "A weapon that transforms enemies into allies instead of simply destroying them." "Not a weapon," Sarah corrected. "A gift. We gave them the one thing that makes us human, the ability to choose who we want to be instead of just following our nature." They watched as a former Devourer construction ship carefully positioned a habitat module, its tentacles moving with surprising delicacy to avoid damaging the structure. The ship's crew, a collective consciousness that now included human emotional patterns, had volunteered to spend the next century helping rebuild worlds they had previously consumed. "The Council is still struggling to understand what happened here," Zarathax continued. "Some call it the greatest military victory in galactic history. Others say it wasn't a victory at all, but something else entirely." Sarah nodded. "My people have a saying, to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women. But that's not really winning. Real victory is when your enemies stop being enemies because they choose to be something better." A communication alert chimed, and Captain THYSS appeared on the holographic display. His reptilian features showed an expression Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the galaxy. Former Devourer fleets are surrendering to hegemony forces and requesting the human treatment. Some are even turning on remaining traditional Devourer ships. It appears the nanobotic infection is spreading through their collective communication networks." "A viral conscience," Zarathax mused. "Leave it to humans to turn morality into a weapon of mass construction." Sarah laughed, the sound carrying more relief than humor. "We tried mass destruction for thousands of years. It never seemed to solve anything permanently." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent signal from Earth. Sarah's parents appeared on the communication screen, their faces showing a mixture of pride and concern that she remembered from her childhood. "Sarah, honey," her mother said, "we just received word from the Galactic Council. They're offering humanity full membership and a permanent seat on the Strategic Defense Committee. They want you to represent us." Her father nodded gravely. "They're also asking if humans would be willing to share the nanobotic technology with other species. Apparently, there are several other galactic threats that might be amenable to conscience-based solutions." Sarah looked out at the construction project, where humans, aliens, and reformed devourers worked side by side to build something better than any of them could have created alone. It was exactly the kind of impossible thing that humans did best. "Tell the Council we accept," she said. "But, on one condition, any species that receives the technology has to promise to use it responsibly. Conscience is a double-edged sword. It can transform monsters into heroes, but it can also cripple those who need to act decisively." Admiral Zarathax placed one of her 4 hands on Sarah's shoulder. "And that, my friend, is why you humans will make excellent guardians of galactic peace. You understand that power without wisdom is just another form of destruction." As the communication ended, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. A simple act of self-sacrifice on a mining station had led to humanity becoming one of the galaxy's most influential species. But, more than that, it had proven that the universe's greatest threats could sometimes be transformed into its greatest allies. "Admiral," said a voice behind them. They turned to see Commander Veltar approaching, her crystalline form reflecting the light from the construction project outside. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors have detected something approaching from outside the galaxy." Sarah and Zarathax exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. The universe always seemed to have one more challenge waiting. "Another invasion fleet?" Sarah asked. Unknown, Veltar replied. But, the energy signatures are unlike anything we've encountered. The fleet is massive, possibly larger than the Devourer Armada. And, Admiral, they're broadcasting on all frequencies. What are they saying? Veltar's electromagnetic voice took on an almost odd tone. They're asking for sanctuary. They claim to be refugees from something they call the silence between stars, and they've heard that this galaxy has learned to transform predators into protectors. Sarah laughed, a sound that held both exhaustion and anticipation. Well, Admiral, it looks like our work is just beginning. Zarathax's bioluminescent pattern shifted to display what Sarah had learned to recognize as determination mixed with friendship. Then, we shall meet this new challenge as we met the last one. Together. Outside the station, a former Devourer ship completed its careful positioning of another habitat module. Its crew, once the terror of 1,000 worlds, now worked with the patience and precision of craftsmen building something beautiful. They had learned what it meant to create instead of consume, to protect instead of destroy. It was, Sarah thought, a very human lesson to teach the galaxy. As news of the approaching refugee fleet spread throughout the system, humans, hegemony forces, and reformed Devourers began preparing for their next great challenge. They would face it as they had learned to face everything, not as separate species competing for resources, but as a unified force committed to the radical idea that anyone could choose to be better than their nature intended. And, somewhere in the depths of space, carried by quantum transmissions and biological networks, the nanobotic gift continued to spread. Across the galaxy, predatory species began to experience something they had never known before, the weight of conscience and the possibility of redemption. The universe was about to become a very different place, one choice at a time.